The screaming started at exactly 2:13 in the morning. Not loud at first, just one sharp cry buried beneath the sound of an old elevator groaning somewhere deep inside the hotel. Then came the pounding, violent, desperate. A guest staying across the hall later told police he heard a woman begging someone to stop staring at her from the corner. But when security unlocked room 217, they found the woman alone. No broken windows, just a freezing room that smelled faintly of burned wood and old perfume. The woman sat trembling against the bed, unable to speak properly. Her fingernails were torn and bloody, like she'd been clawing at the walls. And above the bed, there were deep scratch marks carved into the wallpaper. The strangest part wasn't the room itself, it was what the woman whispered before paramedics carried her away. He was standing beside the closet. She stopped breathing for a second, and he wasn't blinking. Even now, staff at the Stanley Hotel refused to discuss what happened that night, because according to hotel records, room 217 has a history of guests seeing the exact same man, tall, thin, motionless, watching from the corner. And once you start digging into the history of the Stanley Hotel, you realize something deeply unsettling. That woman wasn't the first person to see him, and she may not have been the last. Long before the Stanley Hotel became one of America's most infamous haunted locations, it was supposed to be a place of healing. Nestled high in the mountains of Estes Park, the massive White Hotel opened in 1909 under the ownership of Freeland Oscar Stanley, the wealthy inventor behind the Stanley steamers. He built the hotel after recovering from tuberculosis in the mountain air, believing the isolation and beauty of the area had saved his life. At first glance, the place looked peaceful. Elegant chandeliers, endless hallways, and red carpets stretching beneath antique portraits whose eyes seemed just slightly too focused. Wealthy visitors traveled there seeking fresh air and luxury. But here's the thing nobody talks about. The land beneath the hotel already had stories attached to it. Local workers reportedly refused to remain inside after dark during construction. Some claimed they heard footsteps above them before the upper floors even existed. Others described strange figures walking through unfinished corridors at night. One carpenter allegedly quit after hearing piano music echo through an empty ballroom. There was no piano inside yet. People laughed those stories off back then. Mountain isolation does strange things to the mind. At least that's what everyone assumed. Until 1911, the year room 217 became infamous. The storm hit without warning. Lightning swallowed the mountains, while the hotel's power failed floor by floor. At the time, the Stanley used gaslighting, and during the outage, chambermaid Elizabeth Wilson was sent into room 217 carrying a lit lantern. Nobody knows exactly what happened next. Some say there was a gas leak. Others insist the room itself had always felt wrong. But moments after Elizabeth entered, the entire room exploded. The blast launched her through the floor. Wood splintered. Windows shattered outward into the storm. Guests ran screaming into the hallways while smoke flooded the second floor. And somehow, Elizabeth survived. Barely. She suffered broken ankles and severe injuries, but according to hotel records, she eventually returned to work at the Stanley again. That should have been the end of the story, except staff started noticing something after the accident. Room 217 never stayed empty for long. Guests complained about luggage being unpacked by itself. Married couples claimed invisible hands crawled across their beds while they slept. Then came the whispers. Soft at first, like someone speaking directly behind you. People started requesting different rooms after hearing a woman quietly humming in the dark. A few swore they saw Elizabeth Wilson herself, standing near the bed, not threatening, not violent, just watching, as though she was still working there, still trapped inside the room where she almost died. And decades later, one famous writer would check into the Stanley Hotel and experience something that turned the building into a global legend. In 1974, horror author Stephen King arrived at the Stanley Hotel with his wife during the hotel's closing season. They were nearly the only guests there. Imagine walking through a 6-story hotel, knowing almost every room around you is empty. No voices, no footsteps, just old pipes rattling through the walls and wind scraping against the windows outside. King later admitted the silence disturbed him immediately. That night, he wandered through the empty corridors alone, and something about the hotel got inside his head. The ballroom chairs were stacked upside down, like frozen silhouettes. The hallways seemed endless. After midnight, he reportedly heard distant laughter despite being unable to find anyone awake. Then came the dream. King dreamed his young son was running through the corridors screaming, while something chased him from behind. He woke up drenched in sweat and immediately began writing notes that would eventually become one of the most terrifying novels ever written, The Shining. People love talking about the ghosts connected to the Stanley Hotel. But what makes the story unsettling is this. Stephen King never actually claimed the hotel was haunted. He only said it felt alive. And once that idea spread, the stories became darker, much darker. If there's one part of the Stanley Hotel employees avoid discussing, it's the 4th floor. Because according to staff reports, that's where the activity becomes aggressive. Children laughing in empty hallways, doors slamming repeatedly at night, guests waking to the sensation of someone sitting on their chest. A maintenance worker once described hearing tiny footsteps running above him while repairing electrical wiring after midnight. He assumed children were sneaking around the hotel. There were no children staying on that floor. When he checked security footage later, the hallway cameras showed something strange. At 1:47 a.m., one of the corridor lights flickered 3 times. Then a shadow crossed the wall. Not a person, not exactly. The shape was too tall, too thin, and it moved wrong, like its legs bent backward. The worker quit 2 days later. Another guest staying in room 428 claimed she woke up to a boy standing beside her bed, holding what looked like an old leather ball. At first, she thought it was someone's child wandering the hotel. Then, she noticed his face. There wasn't one, just darkness. She ran from the room barefoot and refused to return for her belongings until sunrise. Look, ghost stories are easy to dismiss when they come from tourists chasing thrills. But when hotel employees start refusing certain floors after dark, people begin wondering whether something else is happening there, something older than the hotel itself. Years ago, a former employee agreed to speak anonymously about parts of the Stanley Hotel most guests never see. Beneath the building sits a network of old service tunnels, once used by workers to move unseen throughout the hotel. Cold, concrete passageways, rust-covered pipes, narrow corridors barely wide enough for 2 people to pass. The employee claimed strange things happened underground constantly. Tools vanished, radios died without explanation. Workers heard conversations echoing ahead of them, only to find empty tunnels when they turned the corner. But one incident changed everything. A night engineer reportedly discovered a locked maintenance door partially open near the older tunnel sections. That was unusual already. The room beyond had supposedly been sealed for decades after structural damage. Still, he stepped inside. At first, the room looked abandoned. Dust-covered shelves, broken furniture, water stains crawling across the ceiling like veins. Then he found the photographs, hundreds of them. But every single image had one thing in common. In the background of each photo, there was the same man, tall, thin, expressionless, standing somewhere different every time, near staircases, inside mirrors, at the ends of hallways, watching. The engineer reportedly took several photos from the room before leaving. The next morning, those images had vanished from his phone completely. 3 weeks later, he resigned without explanation. And according to another employee, he refused to ever speak about the Stanley Hotel again. A paranormal investigator named Daniel Reeves visited the Stanley Hotel in the winter of 2019. At first, he treated the entire experience like a joke. He mocked ghost tours openly. It started with sleepwalking. Daniel's team repeatedly found him wandering hotel corridors around 3 a.m., staring silently into walls. Then he began hearing breathing. Not ordinary breathing, but wet, slow, and close enough to feel against his neck. One night, his audio recorder captured something terrifying during a session inside room 217. Daniel asked, "Is anyone here with us?" For almost 10 seconds, nothing answered. Then a distorted voice whispered, "He brought it back," until Daniel collapsed. Witnesses claimed he started clawing violently at his own throat while screaming that someone was standing behind the curtains. After returning home, Daniel reportedly became paranoid. Friends said he covered mirrors with blankets and stopped answering calls, insisting something from the Stanley had followed him back. Then came the final message. A week before his disappearance, Daniel uploaded a short audio clip online. No introduction, no explanation, just his shaking voice saying, "If you ever stay there, don't look into the hallway mirrors after 3 a.m. The recording suddenly cuts off after a loud knocking sound. Daniel Reeves was never seen again. And the most disturbing part? Hotel staff later confirmed nobody by that name officially checked into the Stanley Hotel that winter. There were no records of him ever being there. The deeper people investigated the Stanley Hotel, the stranger the stories became. A retired archivist working with old blueprints allegedly noticed something impossible while reviewing renovation documents from the 1930s. The hotel's interior measurements didn't fully match the architectural plans. One hallway, on the 4th floor, appeared several feet longer inside than it should have been from the outside structure. At first, it sounded like a drafting mistake, until 2 contractors renovating nearby walls discovered an empty space hidden between sections of the hotel. No windows, no records, no official room number, just a sealed wooden door buried behind layers of plaster. According to rumors from staff, management ordered the area closed immediately after it was opened, but one worker who briefly entered described the room in horrifying detail years later. The air inside smelled rotten, not mold, not decay, something worse. The wallpaper was covered in water damage and deep vertical scratches that looked almost identical to the marks found in room 217 after the woman's breakdown. And in the center of the room sat an old hotel chair facing the wall. Nothing else, just the chair. The worker claimed there were faint handprints covering the wallpaper ahead of it, as though someone had spent years pressing against the wall, trying to escape. Then he noticed the sound, breathing, very soft, coming from inside the wall itself. He ran before anyone else entered. The next morning, management reportedly sealed the hidden room permanently. No photographs were ever released. No official statement was made. And somehow, the blueprints connected to that section later disappeared from hotel archives entirely. By now, you're probably wondering whether any of these stories are actually true. Some are documented, some are rumors. Some may have been exaggerated over decades of fear, but the sightings of the tall man, those never stopped. Guests describe him almost identically, despite never speaking to one another beforehand, always standing still, always watching from corners or mirrors, never blinking. In 2022, security cameras reportedly captured footage from an empty hallway near room 217 shortly after midnight. The footage showed nothing unusual at first. Then one hotel door slowly opened by itself. A man stepped partially into the hallway, tall, thin, wearing dark clothing that looked decades out of date. He stood motionless for almost 20 seconds. Then the hallway lights flickered. For exactly 1 frame, the figure appeared much closer to the camera than physically possible. And then he was gone. Security reportedly searched the entire floor and found no guests nearby. When they reviewed the footage frame by frame, they noticed the figure wasn't looking toward the camera. He was staring directly into room 217, as though waiting for someone inside to notice him. Today, the Stanley Hotel still welcomes guests from around the world. Tourists laugh in the lobby, weddings fill the ballroom with music. Ghost tours walk the corridors every night, but staff still report strange incidents after midnight. Elevators stopping on empty floors. Children laughing where no children are staying. Piano music echoing through locked rooms, and every now and then, a guest leaves early without explanation. Look, maybe the Stanley Hotel is just an old building filled with creaking pipes and overactive imaginations. Or maybe some places absorb pain, the way walls absorb smoke. Maybe certain moments never fully end, because late at night, when snow buries the mountains and the hotel windows glow against the darkness, employees still notice something unsettling on the fourth floor. A figure standing motionless at the end of the hallway, tall, thin, watching. And according to one night manager, the worst part isn't seeing him. It's this. Sometimes, when they check the security monitors, the figure is already looking directly at the camera, as though he knows someone is watching him back. And if you ever visit the Stanley Hotel yourself, pay attention when you pass room 217. Because guests say that if the hallway suddenly goes quiet, if the air turns cold, if you smell old perfume lingering where nobody stands, do not look toward the corner beside the closet. Nobody knows what he's waiting for. If this story disturbed you, leave your theories below, especially if you've ever experienced something unexplainable inside an old hotel. Subscribe for more true paranormal mysteries. And before you sleep tonight, maybe check the corner of your room one more time.